All right, well, welcome to the Church Office podcast. It's brilliant and super excited to have Nigel Ring join us today. Looking forward to learning from you and hearing a bit about your story. And I know our listeners have loved listening to John and just learning from people who've been involved in Christian ministry and particularly sort of church administration for 30, 40 plus years. So thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure. It's lovely to be with you, Gavin.
It's fantastic. Nigel, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in church administration, because you are known as sort of Terry Virgo's number 2. You've worked alongside him and the apostolic team in NFI for years. I mean, you've been involved in what, there was a network of 2,000 churches, big conferences, international ministry. I mean, hats off to you. You've put us a lot of work in over the last few years. The last 30, 40 years is fantastic.
It's been an exciting story, Gavin, and I look back with awe, to be honest, at what God has been graciously allowed us to be involved in. I mean, going back, I'm professionally an engineer.
Yeah.
And I felt called into full-time ministry when I was 9 years old.
Oh, really? Wow.
So was making decisions about what exams I took. For instance, I did Greek at O-level.
Oh, wow.
And when I passed it, I thought the exam system can't work. So I didn't know what I was talking about. But I'm an engineer really in my heart. So I was an engineer through university.
Okay.
And then led a research team in a paediatric hospital, designing artificial limbs for thalidomide damaged children and so on. I did that for about 15 years, but during that time I felt called again. And in that time met Terry.
Yeah.
We had been saved and baptized in the Spirit and wanted to know more about what the baptism of the Spirit was about, wanted to know more about healing. Yeah. And so Terry started coming up and speaking into a little Bible study group we were running in our home. Yeah. And this was while he was just a small-time pastor in Seaford on the south coast of England. And he would drive up with a carload of people, and I got to know him very well during that time, just as friends. Yeah. And in due course, he planted a church out of our home. Yeah. And this is before Newfrontiers ever existed. Yeah, we didn't think that way at all. Yeah. We then felt God urge us to run a Bible week. The Dales Bible Week was already in progress up in Harrogate, led by Bryn Jones and his brother and so on. Yeah. And we wanted something down in the south. So God spoke to us clearly that we should hold one in the south in 1979. And Terry said, well, who's going to run this? And I thought, I'm excited about that. And so that's where I probably started cutting my teeth on administration. I'm not trained as an administrator at all. And so I've learned from my mistakes more than any formal training. So I started serving him in that way. We ran a Bible week throughout the 80s. But then at the second Bible week, I think it was, Bryn Jones, who was our speaker, spoke to Terry, said, I think you're going to burn out if you go on at the pace you're going at the moment, and you need a team around you to complement your gifting. So Terry prayed about it, as is his way. Through the summer, I got back from holiday, and he wrote to me and said, I once said to him, if ever he felt I should be full-time, just tell me. Just give you the shout. Did I still feel that? And if so, would I be his administrator? He said, I don't know what an administrator does, but I know I need one. So I got on the phone to him and I said, Terry, I don't know what an administrator does either, but yes, because I felt it was the fulfillment of that. So that's how I got going with Terry. We've known each other now for well over 50 years as good friends, and I'm still closely in touch with him.
He's been immensely fruitful, hasn't he, in his ministry, and the two of you working, with a team, the fruit is there. Lots of big, high-profile people don't always make it, do they? But Terry really has been unique in that, hasn't he? And NFI has been unique. It's been lovely to watch and see. Yeah. It really has. Yeah.
Let me just give you a history of the name. You say NFI. Yeah. Actually, it's no longer called NFI.
No, it's changed, isn't it?
It was originally coastlands from a verse in Isaiah, which says the coastlands wait expectantly for your instruction, meaning the ends of the earth. But because we were based on the south coast, people misinterpreted it. So we changed it to Newfrontiers, then Newfrontiers International, then NFI. And then we realised that actually Newfrontiers doesn't translate well. It can translate to feel like new limitations, new barriers, new boundaries. And so we created our own word, and it's now called Newfrontiers as one word. And so we no longer call it NFI.
That's the history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And so you talk about kind of running and organising the Downs Bible Week. I mean, there were thousands upon thousands of people going to this. If our listeners that haven't heard of the Downs Bible Week, tell us a little bit about the work and coordination behind the scenes for something like that.
Sure. The Downs Bible Week we held on Plumpton Racecourse near Lewes in Sussex for 10 years. Yeah. And by then, I had been going to a thing called the Capel Bible Week, which then became the Harrogate Bible Week, or the Dales Bible Week. And so when we felt God was saying, run a Bible Week, I mean, it was in a prayer meeting, he spoke prophetically that we should run the Bible Week. Terry said to me, how many do you think we could cater for? So I thought of a huge number and said 1,000.
Yeah.
These days, that's a laughable number. In those days, 1,000 was a lot of people to gather in one place.
Yeah.
And so we planned for that sort of number, but the first year we actually had 2,800.
Is that right? 2,000,
and so we took over
the
Plumpton Racecourse, set it up with all the necessary toilets and marquees and so on. We had to lay our own plumbing because they didn't have a sufficiently big pipeline. Had to lay our own sewer because they didn't have enough there. So we left more behind on the racecourse when we left it than when we arrived. But we always sought to leave it in a good condition. Yeah. I believe that Jesus, when he fed the 5,000, the hill they left behind was spotless. We're told they had 12 baskets full
they picked it up,
of the bits and pieces. Yeah. And we like to feel that we did the same. Yeah. So we started the Plumpton with the Downs Bible Week in 1979. Yeah. And we're going through steadily, growing, went into 2 weeks because we couldn't camp everyone at the same time. We're planning for 1989, had invited the speaker, when just before 1988, God said, this is the last one.
Okay.
And we thought, what? This is going quite well.
Yeah.
But what we had created, Gavin, and it would be true of the Stoneleigh Bible Week, which then followed a couple of years later, we were trying to create a vehicle with a purpose. Yeah. We were not creating an event for its own sake. Yeah. Yeah. And what we were trying to do was to provide a context for bringing churches together as church groups, and there was real benefit in them being together, serving together. That's how we handled the serving. We gave portions of the ministry of service to different churches and said, get on with it. And there was real benefit in that. It built community. It gave a context for other people to come in and at that stage, what is this going on in the church? These restoration churches, I've heard about them, let's go and explore it. It provided a context for people to come and have a look. And so it grew and it grew and it grew, but it was always a vehicle to equip and to give people world vision and hopefully to be missional, although we wouldn't have used that word at that stage, but wanting to send people out. And many people now who are leading in Newfrontiers churches and others would say they were saved as little children perhaps or baptized in the Spirit at one of those Bible weeks and God set them on a course for their life.
I imagine those events really created opportunities for churches to meet other churches, to partner together, that fellowship of leaders, and there's so much positivity going on in all of that, isn't there?
You tend to think of Bible weeks as kind of main meetings and seminars. The reality is that a lot of the benefit is exactly as you say. It's playing games out on site in the afternoons and this sort of thing. And churches just eating together. Many churches would bring their own marquee and all centrally cater, so that also gave a feeling of community. There were a large number of spin-off benefits. And when we closed Downs and then subsequently the Stoneleigh Bible Week, people said, why are you doing this? We're going to miss it. And we had to say, yes, but we're only going on for as long as God gives us permission. And we feel that God is now saying, now's the time to move. So we stop, successful as it may appear to be. But we still went on.
It's fantastic. And the movement has had a passion to reach the lost and to church plant. What were you involved in behind the scenes in that kind of priority that was placed?
Okay, let me back up a little bit before answering that question specifically, and just say that when Terry asked me to be his administrator, it was very much on a personal basis. There was no team, or at least we met soon after he made that invitation. And so I thought, I don't know what an administrator is. I'm still working in the health service as an engineer. do I try and go and do an MBA somewhere or something like that? And I thought, no, what does the Bible say about administration? So I dug into the scriptures. And there were a number of scriptures, and I know you've touched on these in previous podcasts and blogs and so on, but Acts 6, I guess, particularly spoke loudly to me, that in the early church, the apostles, who presumably were acting as the elders of that early church, were faced with this horrendous pastoral problem of the wives from outside Jerusalem getting at each other and getting at the ones inside Jerusalem.
It looked time-consuming, didn't it?
Very time-consuming. And they said, bring before us men of good repute. So they'd already demonstrated a leadership gift, full of the Holy Spirit, so they were able to walk in their own level of faith, as it were, and so on. And then between verses 6 and 7, you find, and the church grew, many priests were added, etc. And you feel, okay, what was happening there was that the apostles were able to give themselves to apostling because Stephen and his colleagues were given to what they were gifted to do. And I saw in that a kind of a light bulb moment. And I always sought to work with Terry on the basis of, Terry, you do what's on your desk that is apostolic. Anything that's not apostolic is my responsibility. And I would take it off his desk, as it were, and either do it myself or give it to someone else. So I've often talked about administration in the context of the liberating role of administration, is to allow pastors, elders, to do what they're equipped to do and not to try and do what they're not equipped to do. Give that to other people. And that principle runs the whole way down through the church.
It does,
You know, we're all called with gifting. And I think the ministries of a church ideally reflect the passions and giftings of the members of the church. And that should define, to some extent, what the church is about in its outreach ministry areas. So I feel the role of administration is not a profile role at all. It's a, if you like, it's an oiling the wheels type ministry that no one knows is there. But if it wasn't, they would. The vehicle would come to a crunching halt because it hasn't got oil in the engine. If you put oil in the engine, no one exalts the oil. They just say, isn't this a nice car?
That's right, that's right.
And I'm very happy that way. So when I was running conferences, for instance, and you know, we did some big ones. Stoneleigh grew to 28,000. We ran conferences at the Brighton Conference Centre and so on. I would say to my team, look, don't expect anyone to come up and say thank you to you. There will be some who do. I'm going to be the one who applauds it because I know how much work's gone into it. Because the only way that people sometimes encounter administration is when it goes wrong.
That's right.
And you don't want them to come to see you for that. So just do it so well that no one comes to see you and you can reckon you're doing a good job.
With that real excellence,
So in terms of how I've kind of got involved with Terry and then the national team, then an international team and so on, with things like church planting, would have been really to help define how we were going to support a church plant financially initially, work out what that meant, what the accountability should be, how that would be monitored, how that would be supported. Because we're not there with the big stick to say you're not doing this right. We're there to say, okay, what's the vision God's given you? How can we get behind that vision to massage it forwards and help you forwards with it? So that's how I saw administration.
I love
in
that.
Context.
That enabling others to do ministry is a lovely disposition, and it's so compelling to hear and to see the difference that you've made behind the scenes.
Thank you.
It is present, and it's lovely, and that's a wonderful principle. If you're a church administrator, listening into this podcast, then how do you position yourself? It is like how we're talking here, like in Acts 6, and enabling them. And there's this lovely bit in Acts 6 I've been thinking about more and more in the last few months, there's this role of unity that we sort of play, keeping the church unified and together. And that's kind of a lovely sort of role that happens in the background quietly, isn't it?
I think another scripture also that really encouraged me when I was doing this study, and I looked at the Old Testament, and there are the obvious examples there of Nehemiah or Joseph or Daniel or whoever, but I wanted a New Testament perspective. So another scripture I came across was 1 Corinthians 12:28. Where at the end of that famous passage in the middle of 1 Corinthians 12 on the gifts of the Spirit, but the chapter then ends with, so first apostles, second prophets, healings, miracles, administrations. And I thought, wow.
I was there.
So administration is a spiritual gift.
Yeah.
It's not just a skill.
Yes.
And that to me was so helpful. I felt, okay, I can hold my head up high, as it were. And I sought at all times to be close to Terry and to hear his heart. And the way I found I could do that best was as often as possible to be in a prayer context with him. And I would deliberately try to get into as many opportunities where he was praying as I could. Maybe one-to-one, and we had the privilege of doing that on occasion, often in a leadership setting, because I felt not only could my faith be encouraged and I personally could be built up and, keep my spiritual plumb line upright, as it were, but also I could hear how he was praying and knowing how, from experience, his prayers tended to be answered. I could sometimes get ahead of the game so that when he says, I really feel God is saying we do this, I'd already done some preparation work towards it. A classic would be, I remember once in Brighton we were praying, it was at a time when one of the political parties was meeting at the Brighton Conference Centre.
Oh yes,
and
I
Terry
do remember
prayed,
that,
Terry prayed, Lord, one day give us the opportunity to hold a leadership conference in that centre. At that stage we were very small. But I went out of that room and I phoned the Brighton Centre and I said, can I come and look round? And out of that, within probably 6 months, we had an approach from John Wimber. He wanted to run a conference, sent someone over, and I felt very smug because I could say, I know all about the conference centre.
I've already done the prep work
I've done the prep
work.
But that was because I heard Terry praying, and I thought, okay, I believe one day that'll come about. Let's find out what it is like in there.
I love that.
I've often said this to administrators, don't just feel you're the do-it person. You're not a technician. You need to know the heart of the person you're serving so that you can reflect and complement that heart. And, if possible, help shape the decision-making by bringing your gifting to the table at the time the decisions are being made. Because it's very easy for church leaders, sometimes their elders, to get into a little bit of an ivory tower and decide to do something that, for practical reasons, might have limitations. So if you can feed in some of the practice, not to say no, I'm a great believer in saying the answer is yes, the question is how. But say, look, if you're going to go that route, which I fully applaud, I think the time scale you've got it on is probably a bit tight for this reason, like permissions or whatever it may be. I would suggest we plan for next summer, not this summer. So you're bringing your gifting to the table at the time the decision's being made. So you're not saying bad decision. You're saying I can fill in that decision in a helpful way.
And we find, don't we, that often the kind of the senior leader or the person that's really setting direction, they don't always have these kind of gifts. So the complementation of these gifts working together is so crucial. And if you're listening to the podcast and you're a pastor, look out for that gifting in your church if you don't already have or know about it. But who can you draw in with that kind of spiritual gift to come alongside you to enable you to do that?
And also I would say, in talking to the pastors, don't feel threatened. God talks, or the Bible, God talks about the body and all the complementary ministries. And, the pastor may be a brilliant teacher, maybe a brilliant pastor in the shepherding sense rather than the office sense. He may be a wonderful teacher, shepherd, but that doesn't mean he's very good on the practical side. Why should he be?
That's right,
I'm not a great preacher. I'll preach on occasion, but I can do some of the practical stuff. So I'm not aspiring competitively to take over. I wouldn't be able to deliver the sorts of sermons that some of my colleagues are able to. Let's complement one another and see that body kind of complete in that way, rather than one person trying to be another person.
There's something wonderful about that, isn't it? And I just think you're, just reflecting on what you've been saying in this conversation about prayer and listening to Terry pray. I've not heard that before. Even though I know at times I've heard Pete's heart as we've been in prayer meeting, but actually to somehow build that into your schedule and your time and be willing to go into those environments where sometimes I can think, going into a group of leaders I might feel a bit uncomfortable, but actually, God's called us to be there and to hear the heart and to play our part in the outworking of ministry, or the outworking of the gospel going out there.
Yes, yeah.
I love that. I think that's a brilliant,
in
idea.
prayer, I think we'd all acknowledge we're very vulnerable.
Yes, that's right.
So you need to be able to handle it well, because obviously I wouldn't go out of that room and say, do you know how Terry was praying?
yeah. You've got to protect that.
In an inappropriate way, one's got to be very protective. He's my brother. I don't want to uncover anything.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
And also, can I just say this, just triggers another thought in mind. He and I, very early on, covenanted together that if ever we saw anything in the other that we were concerned about, we had permission to speak.
Great.
Whether it was the way that you might look at a woman going by, or something you said. I remember Terry, for instance, saying to me once, he said, "You're a bit harsh the way you spoke to that guy." And I said, "Thank you, Terry. I'll try and learn from that."
Yeah.
We gave each other, and still would, and we're no longer living close to each other, we're still in a lot of contact. But we gave each other permission to speak into each other's lives. And I would say that's also a very important thing. As I've got older, it's more difficult to go to a younger elder perhaps and make yourself accountable to him. But I've always found someone whom I can say, I would like to meet with you every 6 months or so. I want you to ask me some difficult questions.
Yes.
So that for the sake of my wife, for the sake of the church, for the sake of my children, they know that I'm accountable and that I'm not untouchable. I think it's very important. We're all flesh and blood, we're all subject to temptation.
Right. And I think what what's wonderful about what I'm hearing as well is this disposition of kind of enabling Terry, but also this relationship that you've got going on. It just strengthens that kind of friendship that's in ministry that you can find, and enjoying that and investing in that. I'm sure you've sat with Terry and had lots of meals and lots of social and time and where it's appropriate in a relationship. Like I will sit and have lunch with Pete, and we will invest into that without an agenda. Like you having those interpersonal conversations, saying, the kids are going through this, or I'm affected by this. This is a real struggle for me. Would you do that? And that humility there is lovely, isn't it? That servanthood, which you really do have. We've got some friends who are in your church in Bath, and they've been saying to me, "What a servant that you are." And have been, and I want that to be a characteristic of me in the ministry that I'm serving here at Christchurch. I want to be a servant and serve others, and if you're in that role, church administration role, there's a great joy and a delight in being in the unseen and just being able to serve a senior leader, and so if you're listening, be encouraged. To take that position,
huge privilege,
and enjoy the grace of God that's available in there.
And who is the servant we're modelling after? Jesus.
Absolutely right.
He was prepared to put a towel around his waist, kneel down, and wash the disciples' feet. If ever there was anyone who you think shouldn't have to do that, it would be him. But he chose to do it. If he can do it, why can't we?
No, it's absolutely right. Yeah, it's absolutely right. And I love the fact that you've fallen into this role, because I've kind of fallen into this role, and I know lots of other church administrators are the same. You've got a great heart to serve your church. Someone recognises some leadership, and then you get thrown into it. And I just love what you were saying about it being a spiritual gift. And I experience that daily, where you think, actually, I don't know what to do, or I'm struggling here. But there's grace that comes for how God's called you. There's grace available to equip you to do what you've been called. And I can't think of a week that doesn't go by where I'm consciously aware of that. So I haven't done any formal training. I haven't done that. But 18 years I've been serving the church. God's been wonderfully faithful. And there's a joy in it, isn't it? And I'm sure lots of people have got a similar kind of story to that as well.
And the evidence, I've only just come into this building, but the evidence is all around me of you doing that well.
Well,
and the way that Pete talks about you. So obviously that's good. Well done.
And the relationship you've got with Terry, I know, and I so appreciate my relationship with Pete. And for listeners out there, it's worth considering, how can you serve your senior leader? What does that look like? How can you improve what you're doing? How can you get behind them. There are some things that people can consider.
Yeah, I think what I would say though, I wouldn't want people to feel under pressure.
Yeah,
I would be the first to acknowledge that I think actually Terry's and my relationship, and perhaps yours and Pete's, was a bit special.
Yeah, yeah.
And that it's possibly not helpful to see that as a model you're trying to follow.
Yes.
I feel that we were both called. We were called to work together.
Yeah.
When we were together in a working sort of sense, we openly acknowledged it was a till death us do part relationship.
Yeah.
Yes, I was employed, I was paid, so was he.
Yeah.
But we didn't ever see it that way. It was a calling, we were called together, and God graciously allowed us to work together in a happy, harmonious way. But it could be a pressure on people if they think, we can never be like Terry and Nigel, as it were.
Yeah. It's another thing
I wouldn't want that.
Yeah, no,
I wouldn't want that. That would not be fair.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Thank you so much so far. I'm getting so much out of this conversation. It really is lovely to sort of sit and learn and hear from you. If you're a pastor listening to the podcast today, and there's so many different situations in there where pastors might hire somebody next. Who do they hire? Have you got any thoughts about? You're someone's listening, single pastor, they've got some finance for a second person, they're going towards maybe a youth worker or a kids ministry or a worship leader, which has been popular, isn't it, in the last few years. What advice have you got for our pastors listening?
I think we were talking, Gavin, a little bit earlier about the kind of complementary nature of ministry and of teams that's so important. Yeah. And I think that often people look on administration of a necessary evil. And, we'll try and kind of give it as little space as we possibly can, but we know we've got to have a bit somewhere. Yeah. And I think that fails to understand the huge blessing administration actually can be.
Yes.
It is a spiritual gift. I even call my website Feeding 5,000 is no picnic.
Yeah, I love
because
that.
it kind of combines the ministry side with the practical side. Yeah. And it's not easy, but it's important. Yeah. And if you think of Jesus in Mark 6 and the other Gospels feeding the 5,000, there is order in there, 50s, 100s, delegation, intentional delegation to the disciples. Think how much they must have learned by being given bread to give to 50 people when they knew it wasn't big enough. Oh, but it multiplies. Suddenly their gifting is brought out. Yes. So I feel that the role of administrator in the church can be much more than just databases and spreadsheets. It is about people. And I would say administrators should be people. They're not just do-it people. They're not technicians. Good administrators love people and want to facilitate people by creating an environment perhaps that is most conducive to their growth. So if I'm running a conference, I don't want people to encounter the bits of administration. I want them to leave having met with God. And if they're walking out of the door saying how excited they are, I think, good. I created an atmosphere in which they could hear from God. And they were not being distracted by the air conditioning being too cold or too noisy or the PA being too loud or whatever. They could meet with God. I've done my job.
That's right.
So with that in mind, I would say that someone who's leading a church, maybe a young church that's growing, don't belittle the benefit that a good administrator can bring to you. So you may be looking for, the temptation is to look for another person like yourself.
Exactly.
That's comfortable.
Yeah.
But you don't need someone else like yourself. You've already got yourself. So you want someone else who's going to complement your gifting. And it might be a youth leader, it might be a worship leader, but there are specific areas of ministry. An administrator is across all aspects of the church. And so it's well worth considering, and I really urge you to consider seriously, getting someone who you feel very comfortable with to come in alongside you administratively, who has an understanding of what administration is in terms of releasing people in their gifting in the church, as well as the organisational things which are obvious, like opening up and turning lights on and clearing up the litter. But no, it's more about, okay, in the interests of the people in the church, forget the building aspects, they are important, but what can you contribute as an administrator with the pastor to that person being well discipled?
Yes.
And it may need to be a bit systematic, a bit organised. In fact, I even wrote a book, Discover and Serve, which was to help people find where they could serve in the church. The temptation is that people feel, well, maybe I can be a house group leader, and if I do really well, I can become an elder, and if I do really well, I can become a lead elder. Yeah. Is there any other career path, as it were? And yet, everyone's gifted differently.
Yeah, that's right.
And people with mercy ministries, for instance, may feel passionately, I want to serve the poor in my community. Well, there's no space here. We're focused on preaching and prayer and worship, none of which I would derive. But nevertheless, this aspect of ministry to the poor, I think, is very important. Yeah. If you can win the poor, actually it's a great way to build the church. Yeah, because they know they're in need, whereas a lot of the rich people in your community don't feel they are, so they're not going to be receptive to the gospel. An administrator working well with a pastor can facilitate those sorts of process that will allow people, I have got a place in this church. The administrator can sit down with someone and say, what is it that I talk to you about that your eyes light up? Yeah. And they say, well, to be perfectly honest, it isn't the sorts of things we do on a Sunday. Yes. But if I can visit old people in my community, I get excited. This dear old lady, do you know, next door to me, and they start telling stories about the lady next door or whoever. And so the administrator can then say, okay, I wonder how we can help you do that. Yeah. Can we create an environment where you can start reaching out to people who are older in the community, talking to the pastor? Can you preach on the way that we can reach out into the community and help older people? I've never thought of that, but I'm asking you to, because we've now got this person who wants to start a ministry. Let me tell you a story. Back in Brighton once, a couple came to us. I was an elder of the church, as well as being, I was never administrator of the church. I was always Terry's administrator in the kind of wider church ministry, but I was an elder of the church, so obviously I had an interest in administration. And a couple came to us one day and said, can we start a soup kitchen? This was back in the early 80s. Yeah. And we said, why do you feel that? They said, well, we've had this experience, and they've been in a different Christian setting where they'd done it, and we saw real blessings. So we said, go for it. And as soon as we announced it, 40 people in the church fell in behind them, either as preparers of food or as prayers, or people who went out on the street and met someone who was sleeping in a shop doorway with their dog. And suddenly there was a whole tranche of people here who had just been waiting for the opportunity, but there didn't seem to be an opportunity in this church. Yeah. And then you find the gifted couple who were passionate. And you kind of say to the church, we've got this, we're now going to facilitate this, and then the administrator can come in alongside that couple who may not be very gifted. Okay, you'll probably need a few rotas to prepare the food, health and safety, those sorts of things. Do we need to warn the police? Things like that they may not think of, but it's the administrative gift. So in that way, I think an administrator being in the mix quite early can really help the church to grow. Now, not many people would say that, but I'm telling you it's true.
I think, and from your experience, of working with hundreds of churches, it is so true, isn't it? Because as we deploy people in the gifts that they've got, it's kind of making them successful and giving them opportunity. And I love it when you meet somebody who's passionate about kids ministry and you deploy them in it, you support them in it, and they flourish.
Absolutely.
And the kids love it because so-and-so's on today and they get excited about it. There's something, that's part of the role, isn't it? That's part of the joy and the delight.
And if you can get people in their area of their sweet spot, as it were,
it's like that.
It also cuts out all grumbling and complaining. Because they've got nothing to grumble about. They're fulfilled. Whereas people who aren't well mobilized have got the luxury of time to complain about what other people are not doing.
To sit there and just think,
why don't they do it this way? Why don't they do it that way?
No, that is so true. And so if you're a pastor, to deploy someone to come alongside you in this role will not only support you in taking a piece of work off you, the practical things that we've already talked about that you've done with Terry and I do with Pete, but this enabling of the church to play their part, the body to be functioning together. And sometimes people, like you say, don't always put themselves forward, but if there are, we found mercy projects that we've got started with staff that all of a sudden, people have gone, oh, I'd love to get involved
Absolutely.
with single mums and reach out to people in that demographic. I've kind of been sitting here waiting. So we applaud and love the initiative that people take, and we can, like you say, we can support those initiatives, or we can try and create platforms and opportunities for others to serve. And but that's so much more.
So just to say, because one's got to believe that the people who are in your church, God has given to you for purpose.
Yes, yeah.
So if we're not facilitating them coming through in their gifting, being discipled or whatever, as leaders, we're failing them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Otherwise, why has God sent them? He sent them for purpose. Every church is unique.
Yes.
Because every person is unique.
Yeah.
So we need somehow to know how to mobilize, how to facilitate. And there may be things we can't do in the church because we haven't got the people.
Yeah.
So we should never do ministry because we feel we ought to.
Yes. Yeah.
We've got to do what we see God's hand on, and then facilitate that, and
that's,
oil the wheels of that.
That's a really good, really, really helpful point. Yeah, I love that. There's a pastor, a friend of mine, who talks about his life being a bit like kind of Swiss Army knife, and the knife is the kind of the preaching the word, but he just finds great joy in actually putting tools away because somebody else is doing it, and then he puts another tool away, and there's this joy in actually
illustration.
Okay, I don't need that anymore, someone else is doing that, but God's called me to preach the word here and to shepherd people, and the more and more things that get put away, you'll find as a pastor actually you might be reluctant to this. You think, right, it's going to take more time, it's going to take more effort, but actually on the other side we've seen fruit with leaders say, no, this really works. And we are advocating something here that might be a change for your ministry or for your elders to consider, but certainly a worthwhile opportunity of thought and to change to it. So I think that's really, really helpful. And what's lovely is that you've been involved in administration with Terry on the one side in big international ministry, but also you've been an elder in the church and know what it's like to serve in a church. So your perspective is hugely important here. So
I was an elder for probably 25 years. I mean, there's a lesson in there as well, incidentally. I was an elder probably for 25 years, although I was in the church for probably 32, something like that.
Okay.
And there came a time when I realised that I was actually travelling, because part of my ministry was international, particularly amongst the poor.
Yeah.
And although I was an elder, I was often not at elders' meetings.
Okay.
So when I got into elders' meetings, I'd be asking questions which everyone knew the answer to except for me. And I realised that I was cluttering the eldership rather than enhancing it.
Yeah,
I wasn't really elding.
Okay. Eldering
and
or whatever.
So I talked to the guy who was leading at that stage, and I said, look, I don't think I'm being very helpful here. I think it'd be better if I put it down. And he said, no, please don't, But anyhow, after a little while, he said, I think you're right. And so I said, okay, I'm very happy to resign eldership. The one thing I would ask is that I'm the one that tells the church. Yeah. Because I think so often if someone leaves the eldership, it's because there's some sinister reason that no one will reveal. Yeah. So I thought, I will tell the church I have chosen to put this down.
Yeah, that's good leadership.
Because I don't feel that I am being an elder. I'm one in name only.
Yes.
So I think there's a lesson in there as well.
Yeah.
That, we're called maybe for a season, but it's not a title for life. Well, indeed, I hope it's never a title. Yeah. It's it's a responsibility, it's a role out of your gifting, your leadership gifting.
That's great. And if pastors, if you've got any further questions, or you want to grab a coffee or a conversation, then please get in contact. We love this. We want to enable your church, support your church for gospel ministry, and reorganizing teams and drawing people in. These are the big things. And to go and see another church, we've hugely benefited from going visiting other people, seeing what it looks like, having a role in place. But then also talking to the different people around that and saying, would you talk to me more about this? Because there's only so much we can convey on a podcast. So please get in contact. And
there can be huge benefit, we found, actually, in taking a whole leadership team to meet with a leadership team of an equivalent sized church. You just spend a day just interacting. Yeah,
different people in the same roles.
You learn
you
huge
connect
amount.
And you really do. That's great. Well, moving on to our administrators and how we can encourage them. And you've already given us some great principles, being in the room as your senior leader prays. We've talked a bit about the relationship. We've talked about the disposition and enabling. Have you got anything else that you would kind of offer up as an encouragement to administrators?
I think make sure you protect your own walk with God.
Yeah. Yes.
It's easy for people to see you as the technical person or technician, as it were, as I've used, and just the do-it person. But no, it's got to be rooted in your personal walk with God. You can't live second-hand faith.
Yeah. Yes.
And when I've been doing administrative things, I've often thought, Father, what's the solution to this? And I would deliberately say, ask for an answer, ask for a provision, ask for a resource. What's your answer to this? Because he's not thrown by circumstances in the way that I am. But, one's got to be in that place to be able to do so. Yeah. Stephen, Philip and so on, they were full of the Holy Spirit. They were walking their walk in very practical ways, listening to the Holy Spirit. So I'd say, first and foremost, protect your own personal walk. I think be very comfortable in the space that you've been given. I'm not saying don't be ambitious, because I think there is a place for ambition, but I think you can be wrongly ambitious and feel that I'm doing what I'm doing just until something better comes along. No, if God's put you there for this season, be very faithful and very fulfilled and very satisfied in what he's given you to do. Now, for me, that season lasted for decades. For others, it may be just a few years. But be satisfied, be fulfilled. Don't be an irritant, always looking for the next thing. People will sense that. And it also, by implication, means what I'm doing now is lower than what I'm aspiring to become. Whereas administration is a ministry. And it's a complementary ministry to a lot of other ministries within the church. So it's a high calling.
It is.
I've taught often on feeding the 5,000 and how Jesus... If you look at Jesus as an administrator in that, which not many people would do, but how many things there are you can learn from him being satisfied there, to be organising things, taking responsibility, having a plan, exercising his faith. He offered the bread and fish up to heaven, and then was able to give it out. He was functioning there as a man. He was holy man, holy God. He wasn't afraid of the administrative organisational bit and did it very well. So we can learn from him. I think humility, not aspiring to have your name in lights. Don't worry if at the end of a conference no one says thank you to you. That's fine. You've done, God's the one who knows. He's the one who will one day say, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of your master. He's the one who will give you rewards. It's nice to be thanked, of course it is. We all like it. But don't be offended if you're not.
That's good.
So not looking for profile, having that genuine humility, not a false humility, a genuine humility. I'm just doing what I've been called to do.
I think that's really important. One thing to just interject with you there is that Pete's always said to me, when you're talking about enjoy being in your space and functioning in your space. And Pete's always said to me, in the first few years of ministry and serving as administrator, he was saying you've got to come to terms with the grace of God in your own life. And sometimes it took me a while to go, actually, God has called me to this, and not that I want to be arrogant in any way, but just a recognition of, this is a spiritual gift. God's called me here. He's called me to serve. He's given me the grace to do what I can do. So there's some confidence, actually, to go and do it. Go and do what God's asked you to do.
It's huge. If he's called you to, he's going to equip you to do it. Yeah, sure.
And to recognise that. And I love that. And I think one thing, your point on... just looking after yourself and your own walk of God is so important. It's so easy for me, and I've got people in the church who help me with this, it's so easy for me on a Sunday to get busy with things that happen that I end up coming out of the meeting and I don't hear the word, or I hear parts of the word. And, how can you rearrange your time on a Sunday that there are other people that can be on call other than just yourself? And that's something that I've had to do. Tola, you'll know this if you're listening to the podcast, he'll often say to me, I haven't seen you in a meeting last week. What can I do to enable you to be in the meeting? So be talk to others about it. And that's what you say about humility as well. It comes in is, we want to protect those times. So
I think that's true. I think there is an inevitability, though, that with the gifting that you and I have, we notice things that others won't. So that I know that on occasion I've been on the platform, part of the platform party, even if it's only because I'm giving the notices. But nevertheless, even while the worship's going on, I know that I'm keeping an eye on things. Oh, that needs adjusting, or the way they took the offering wasn't good. I'll change that tomorrow. And these sorts of things.
We don't switch off, do we?
We don't switch off.
Yeah.
And so there is a place, I think, where you do need protected time, where you do switch off. So having a day off a week, at least, is important, and that it is a day off for you, and that it's not just to get mundane jobs done, but you've got a bit of space. For a season, I used to take a day a month where I pray and fast. I would borrow someone else's house who was working, so that I was in a neutral environment, so that I didn't have things calling for attention. And I'd use it to pray, I'd use it to study. I may use it to do a bit of planning or something, but it was my space. It was the days before mobile phones. No, it wouldn't have been actually, but certainly we weren't quite as tech-driven in those days.
As we are now.
As we are now, so there weren't quite the same distractions. But I think that's worth doing, a day a month, just by yourself. It's your day. It's part of your job. You can take it out. You'd have to check with Pete, obviously, but you don't have to take it out of your own time, as it were, because to do your job well, you need that day.
It's true. I think it's encouraging. Pete's been encouraged when I've said to him, look, can I go and do this, or can I have some time to read this particular book?
Sure.
And it is. It's working together in all aspects. I love that. Nigel, to finish then on our podcast, resources for church administrators. What have you got to, I know you've written some stuff, and I'd love to hear it. Don't hold back from presenting them. What are good books for us to be reading and reflecting on? I'm
not sure that I'm going to be able to tell you lots of good books.
Fine.
I think that since I was active, there have been a lot more stuff coming on the market, and I've not kept up. I'm an old man. But, for what it's worth, I have written some pamphlets, really, a little bit more than that. One is The Gift of Administration, which really is a reflection of my own walk, which I've referred to already. And it's really a Bible study.
It's great.
It doesn't tell you how to administrate, it's more of a Bible study.
But a real good biblical basis.
It's a biblical basis, really I hope, for it. Then there was also one, Event Management Jesus Style, where I tease apart feeding the 5,000.
I'm looking forward to reading that. I haven't got to that one yet.
How Jesus handled that as well. There's one, Discover and Serve, which I mentioned just in passing. It is actually out of print now, but it's all on my blog.
Okay, great.
I reproduced it on my blog, and it's really, I've subtitled it, Finding Your Place of Service in the Local Church. And it helps people to find their spiritual gifting, their natural talents and skills, how much time they have available, what their passion is, what they get excited about. And from that, through a kind of I run it as a course, or used to run it as a course, and then an interview process at the end, you can help people suddenly discover, oh, I'm a unique person with some interesting qualities and things that maybe others haven't thought of. And it helps them feed them through into an area of ministry. Then there's another one I wrote, just because I also have a passion for the poor. You may not want to include this, but the poor deserve the best. Because I believe it. Let's bless people who are poor with the best. And so there are some things there about excellence in ministries, in mercy ministries. So they may be helpful.
I think these are great, and I've certainly read the church administration one, and I thought it is a great biblical grounding. And I'd love to read the one about the gifting. I'll get my hands on that off you, definitely. You have got a book that I've read called Prophecy in Spreadsheets, which is quite a quirky sort of name.
Fun title,
they've put together that, and that is excellent. So there are more and more resources coming out, and I think we'll keep an eye out for the blog and social media for these. We'll promote these and the link, but also we'll promote your website, that you've got articles that you've been writing. You've got loads of videos. I've gone through some of your church administration videos. They are
that's
fantastic.
nigelring.org. Is the website address.
Nigel, I think we'll call it a day, because we've covered so much ground, and I'm so thrilled. There's so much I've personally just got out of this time. Here the highlight for me was the prayer one. Sitting and listening, and that has really impacted me, and will be a benefit and a blessing. So thank you for your time, and thank you for answering the questions and just opening up your story. And I'm so grateful to God for you and people like John Truscott and people that have gone before us, that have done the hard work of establishing, saying, actually, this is a spiritual gift. There's a strong biblical sense of the role and the need for the role. Church administrators didn't exist 30, 40 years ago in the same way that they do now.
It was extraordinary, but that's true. When I first became an administrator, I found it difficult to find anyone else who was doing it.
Yes.
I found half a dozen or so, and we would meet every so often to encourage one another.
Yeah. And it's great.
It's a different scene.
It really is, yeah. And so I'm grateful for what's been established and for people like yourself that have gone through and done it. And we can hugely see the fruit of what's NFI have done. It's Newfrontiers, I should say now, shouldn't I? Correct me. And it's lovely to talk to you. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Listeners, if you've got any questions or anything that you'd like to know more about, as I said earlier, then please get in contact at questions@thechurchoffice.co.uk. Please check out the website if this is the first time you've picked up the podcast. There's free articles, documentation. There's things to encourage you and bless you in your work, particularly if you're a church administrator. If you're a pastor, then there's other material on there for you to say, right, who can I draw into my team? How do I appoint somebody? What can you do? We'd love to hear from you. If you've been blessed by the podcast, hey, get in contact. We'd love to do that and connect. And we're always looking for guests and to have people on. So maybe you're the next guest. You never know. Thank you so much for your time. We will see you again soon.